So good morning, everyone. My name is Alex. I'm one of the Adobe specialists at the University of Arizona, and joining us today are Brian, our lead Adobe specialist, as well as Tess, our program coordinator, who's also a very talented photographer. So she's going to share some knowledge too, so you don't have to listen to just me. So this workshop is creating and editing images on your mobile device. And what this is about is kind of unlocking the potential of the camera on your phone or iPad, tablet, excuse me, and seeing how you can create pretty nice, pretty high quality images on all in one go. It's there's a few apps, but we're going to explore these 5 apps: Lightroom Mobile, Adobe Capture, Photoshop Camera, and Photoshop Mix and Fix. And since we're all here now, the first thing I'd like for us to do is, it's always nice if you follow along. You can follow along with your own files. And thank you, Brian, just shared our resources page again. Or if you want to replicate exactly what we demonstrate, the assets are available at the bottom of the agenda here. And you'll see this folder with 8 different images. Unfortunately, on mobile, you can't just kind of download a zip file and save them all. So it takes like 3 minutes of your life. But you'll tap on the image and hit the little download button. You might not get a preview, but there's a little down arrow right here. Ooh, I like that I can zoom now. And then it'll show you the full image, and you can do a tap and hold on some devices. On this particular app, if I'm using Chrome, I do open in, and I can select save image. So you'll have to do that 8 times, just going back twice after each one. I hope that's okay. All right, so let's go ahead and chat while you guys are getting those files. The first app we're going to check out is Lightroom Mobile, which if I'm a little biased, it's my absolute favorite app. I actually don't use the other ones nearly as much, although I do really enjoy them. But Lightroom I use all the time. I use them for personal photographs, for photographs that are going on social media. I've used it for passport photos. I can do a lot with it. And aside from maybe anything that I'm hired to do, I would still get my big camera for that. But my phone has really replaced my day-to-day camera. It just, this little guy, I have this little Lumix camera. I didn't use it for 2 years. I didn't know where the charger was, and I didn't miss it. So you can get a lot done. All right, so let's check out Lightroom Mobile. This is available on the reference site. And the one caveat here is that almost everything we're showing you is actually completely free. You don't need a subscription for it, but there are a few features specifically in Lightroom that you won't be able to use unless you're actually paying for the Adobe CC subscription. Otherwise, all you need to use these apps is an Adobe login, which is free. All right, let's jump into Lightroom Mobile. The next thing I'd like to mention is that I am working from an iPad, just so that I had more screen space for you all. So the interface might be slightly different because of that real estate, but the functions are all the same. So if you're having trouble finding something, please feel free to mention it in the chat. And if you have any questions along the way, ask away. We love answering questions. I might answer it, Brian might, Sarah, Tess might, somebody might chime in and answer it too, which is great. Okay, so when you first open Lightroom, it'll make you sign in. So sign in if you can. And you'll see your catalog view. And right now my catalog is empty. It's inviting me to get started. And there's a few ways you can add images to Lightroom. The first way is to have it auto sync your files. And I'm going to tell you that personally, I do not recommend doing that. If you're anything like me, you take a lot of pictures on your phone of mundane things that might be important, like my vaccine card is on there, my an address, a screenshot of something that I wanted to remember. And I don't want all of that going into my catalog. So you can add or import images a few at a time. And that way you'll be a little more focused on what you're working on. So that's way one I don't recommend. And I'll show you where that is just for your knowledge. It's in the ellipses in the top right, settings, import, and you can see auto add photos and videos are both swiped off. You can swipe them on if you like. Maybe you have a dedicated Lightroom phone. That might be the case. Okay, let's go ahead and add some photos. And to do that, if you look at the bottom right, there's two blue buttons. There's a little picture with a plus sign. That's how we add pictures we've already taken. We'll do it that way first. And then there's a camera where you can actually take pictures using the Lightroom app, but they'll be in a RAW file format instead of JPEG, which is uncompressed and higher quality, which is one of my favorite things about Lightroom. All right, let's just add a couple photos. From camera roll, and I'm gonna go to a album that I made. You can tap an image and it'll let you actually work on it beforehand and then add it by hitting the blue check mark, or you can hit the ellipses in the top right and you can enter select mode. There's also a select all there. So I'm just going to bring in these two plants of mine. So I just tapped and they're selected. If I select someone by mistake, actually, let's get this fella. But if I don't want it, I can tap and uncheck. But let's go ahead and bring them in. And then you add your files. And now I have 3 files in my catalog. Just like everything else Adobe tends to try to do, this is non-destructive. So any changes I make to a photo in this application only exists in the app until I export the file out, which is really nice. It's nice to treat your originals as kind of untouchable. All right, let's do some editing. I'm going to start with the middle one here. So I just went ahead and gave it a tap. And you'll see a similar workspace on your phone, except all these tools are at the bottom and you kind of swipe through to find the editing menus. If you're not sure where to start, you can hit the auto button and it'll do a little bit of editing for you. If you look at the difference now, it brightened up the shadows, it added some contrast, it's got a little more saturation. So if I tap and hold on the image, I can see before, and if I let go, I can see after. It's a really important thing to note because it's really fun to see your before and after. So before, after. And I'm not that happy with the auto. I think it's still a little hazy, a little washed out, and I think the contrast, the saturation is a little too much for my taste. So I'm just going to undo. In the top, you'll see redo and undo next to the little question mark. So undo. You can always undo. It's non-destructive. Nothing is forever. All right, let's just go into a few of these menus, and then we'll bring a picture in that we take with the camera, and then I'll show you how to do selective edits as well, which is a subscription feature, but it's worth checking out. Are there any questions at this point? Just give a pause for reflection. Okay, so the light menu, if you tap the caret, it opens it up. It controls the overall brightness, the specific shadows and highlights, the contrast, which is the difference between the darkest and brightest parts, and then the white point. So that lets you control the brightest part of your image, making it brighter or darker, and the black point. So whites and blacks don't necessarily affect detail, highlights and shadows do. So let's go ahead and see what we would do with this. Looking at it, I might say the highlights need to come in a little bit. And I might like to bring the black point down to get rid of a little bit of that haze. Oops, it didn't do it. There we go. And maybe I'll increase contrast a little bit. And I don't know, maybe bring the white point down as well. So highlights down even more. So you can see I'm kind of getting there before and after. It might be a little too dark now because of the edits I made. So I might actually pull the overall exposure up. And I think I think it's a more detailed image now. It's pretty okay. The other thing I can do, and let's go ahead and just double tap each of these to set them back to 0. I'm going to use the curves tool because I think it's really satisfying to use on a mobile device. There's this little, I don't know, little snake next to the word light, and that's your curves. And it overlays this grid with a line, and it might give some of us anxiety and remind us. Oh, that's a really great question, Karen. How does this compare to PS Express, Photoshop Express? I will chat about that shortly. So the curve tool is nice because you just tap on the line and you control it. The left side is the darkest points. The right side is the brightest points. And as you move that part of the line up or down, you're controlling that part of the exposure. And you can add points to manipulate the shape of a curve and add contrast or take contrast away. And it's something that I suggest you play with, that you get a feel for. But personally, I start with curves and then I fine tune with the sliders. So now I might pull the highlights down to get a little bit of that detail back. And you can see before and after, it's kind of a similar edit, but I landed on more contrast. So to answer your question, Karen, how does this compare to Photoshop Express? I believe Photoshop Express is part of the subscription service, and it's pretty nice. I think it's more focused on layering and compositing, and I don't even remember how many adjustments in there. Brian might be able to fill us in on that. It's been a while since I opened Express up.
Of course, yeah. So Photoshop Express is kind of built to be a super light version of Photoshop. So it has some basic compositing stuff. You'll see a whole lot of these slider menus and things like that for editing. It also has a bunch of pretty quick one-button push solutions for things. It's great for adding like small pieces of text and things like that. There's some crossover, but Lightroom in general is going to give you significantly more options for editing your image.
Great. And like Brian said, another thing is Lightroom is meant to let you edit many images quickly, and I think Express will give you more of a single image at a time. Oh yeah, okay, so I was thinking of just Photoshop Mobile, my mistake. And you will find a lot of redundancies between the editing capabilities, but what Lightroom does that Photoshop or Photoshop Express doesn't is the ability to copy edits, to catalog files, and to take images in RAW in the app. So it's a really good question. All right, so let's say I'm going to just go through a few more here. Color is how we can adjust the temperature. The tint is how green or magenta it is, which is attached to temperature. And this is what we call white balance. So all the light that we perceive has a temperature to it. But because of our amazing brains and eyes, everything generally just looks like light to us, like white light. But to a camera, some light can be blue, some can be orange, some can be on the greener end, which is why we need white balance, because sometimes the camera doesn't quite get it right. In this picture, I'd say it's pretty good, but if I wasn't sure, I could grab this eyedropper and I could tap in a neutral color like one of these gray rocks. And I think you can see it didn't really make any changes, which is kind of surprising. So what I generally do is play with vibrance and saturation, and I only adjust temperature if I need to. So vibrance adjusts colors, they makes them stronger or weaker without affecting skin tone as much. And saturation is just your broad stroke. It increases all color strength or decreases all color strength. So generally, if my color gets a little too intense from the contrast that I add, I might pull the saturation down and bring the vibrance up a tiny bit to make up for that broad stroke. So if I tap and hold, you'll see before and after. And personal taste, what you're going to do with it. The effects panel, I'm going to talk about texture and clarity when I show you selective edits, and I'm going to try and go not go too crazy with Lightroom because we got other apps to talk about. And we're not going to get into detail and optics this time around, but you can always ask questions at the end. We will have plenty of time. Yeah, Karen, I think that's a great point that Lightroom has a little more of advanced look to it, but I think you can find that it's actually pretty forgiving and fun to use. So I like that you think the curve tool is cool. Okay, so here's something that I really like. If I tap the 3 dots in the top right, I can copy the adjustments I just did to this image by clicking copy settings, and I can choose what to copy. So I really just did light and color, but I'll just leave it like that. And I can go to another image and I can paste. So this is one of those really standout things about Lightroom. And you can see, because those 2 pictures were taken in the same time of day and the same lighting, they took really nicely to having the same edit, which is a really useful tool. I just took what I spent 5 or 10 minutes doing and applied it in an instant. One thing I didn't show you, which I think is this tool I always start with, is the crop tool, which is, if you look in the right-hand side, it's 2 sliders. They look like this, right? Because they crop in like that. And the crop tool is pretty nice. It's very nice. You can choose an aspect ratio. So for example, when I post to Instagram, I always choose the biggest vertical option, which is 4:5. Oops. Or you can choose other ones. Maybe it's going to be an Instagram story, so you choose 9:16 or anything like that. Or you can choose custom, which just means drag it however you like. So again, let's do 4:5. If I tap underneath where that little angle is, I can change the direction, the angle of the image. I can also reset it by hitting that back arrow next to the cancel button. And I'll show you one more tool in crop that is not quite relevant here, but we'll use it anyway. It's the straighten tool. And if you look at it, it's a little level, like a little bubble level. And you tap that, and what you do, oh, maybe it's different on the app. On the app, it just straightens for you. I thought you could draw your line. So it'll automatically straighten it for you, which is pretty nice. Or otherwise, you straighten it yourself. I don't know where my mind went with that one. Okay, so that's kind of our global basic adjustments. You can copy and paste them over. Are there any questions about any of those tools that I just showed? I could go through it really quick, just re-demonstrate if you like. Let's do it fast, just for fun. So I'm gonna hit that arrow with a line where it completely resets my image. And we'll start with crop. I switch it to 4:5. And I'll straighten it myself and decide what looks good. Looks good, I'll hit done. And then I went to light, and I chose to use the curve tool, which is that line to the right. This tool it does even more than what I just showed you. You can actually focus on different color channels, but that's going to be something we chat about on the advanced workshop in June. So I like to give it an S shape. I like to pull the bottom up a little bit because it gives it a little bit of that older trendy look right now. And I just keep poking around. Sometimes things get weird if you pull too far. That's not really what I like, so I'll just undo. So I'm happy with my tone curve, but I lost some detail in the highlights, so I'll pull the highlights down. Otherwise, I'd say I've got a pretty good look here. And again, you can pinch and zoom in. And this is just a picture I took with my phone. You know, it gets the job done. And then I went to color, pulled the saturation down a little bit, and I pulled the vibrance up. But editing is highly to taste. So you might come up with something completely different, and that's something that I really appreciate. And also in the color menu, you can create a black and white edit. Okay, so let's talk about the selective tools, which are a premium feature, a subscription feature, but they might be worth your time. And anybody that's a university employee or student has a subscription. So for you, it's already free. Okay, underneath the crop tool, we have a Band-Aid, which is our healing or spot removal tool, which I'm not going to spoil Tessa's demonstration, so we'll just play here. There's a random hair here, and I guess I don't like hairs in my rocks. So let's see if we can take that hair out. Touch on the Band-Aid, and you can choose heal, where it will attempt to blend parts of the image. It will put pixels on top of them and blend them with one another. Or you clone, where it will copy pixels from one space to another. Let's just try heal out, and you just paint on what you want gone, and it will make a second. I kind of painted a Cheeto here, right? Like a baked Cheeto. And you just drag it to where you want it to reference, and it will try and put it on top and blend it. So, you know, it did okay. The hair's gone, but there's obviously a repeated rock, but nobody's really looking at that part of the picture anyway. So the healing brush is a really nice, quick way to remove unwanted parts of an image. And then we have the actual selective edits, which is nice that it's showing us the three. We have a brush where you paint what you want to change. You have a radial gradient that spills out from the center or comes from the edges and ends at the center, and you'll see it. And then we have a linear gradient, which applies a fading adjustment from left to right, top to bottom, from a certain direction. Okay, so let's say I want to make the rocks in the back darker. They're a little distracting, but I don't want to crop them out. I'll hit the selective edits, and I will choose the blue plus on the left-hand side. Yeah, that hair was a reach. All right, and let's hit the blue plus, and you can see the three tools we mentioned. Let's start with the brush, and the brush lets you paint a change in the image. So if I paint here, the red is what we call our mask, which describes what part of the image is being edited. And then I have a familiar menu on the right-hand side. So if I go to light, I can pull the exposure of that part down. If I go to color, I can pull the saturation down. If I go to detail, actually, let's go to effects, and I pull the clarity down, it kind of makes it blurrier and less noticeable. So just quickly like that, I added an adjustment. If I accidentally painted somewhere that I didn't want affected, I can hit the eraser tool. So there's my brush on the left-hand side and my eraser underneath, and I can just start painting and remove. You can see here, there's a difference. I painted that center part. And of course, I can undo if I don't like what I did. This is my brush size. And the way it works is you tap and drag up to make the brush bigger, tap and drag down to make the brush smaller. And when you're trying to be precise, you make it smaller. And then this is my brush softness, feather. So if it's at 0%, you have a really hard edge. And I can't think of any time you would want to do a selective edit with a hard brush like this. It makes your editing really obvious, kind of like you cut it out with scissors and put it on top. So I usually stay between 50 and 100% feather. And then this last one is flow, which describes the how hard it paints, if you will. So at 50% flow, it takes a few more strokes to get a complete 100% adjustment. So lowering the flow makes it less obvious and lets you kind of gradually work it up. If you picture a paintbrush, when you dip it the first time, it's 100% flow, and as you paint, your flow runs out. I hope that's an okay analogy. Any questions about the paintbrush tool? I mentioned texture and clarity, so I'll go ahead and show you. You can add as many as you like. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to hit the plus, and I'm going to grab my paintbrush and paint on this this window. Let's make it a little bit bigger. That's pretty good. And your brush size doesn't change when you zoom in or not. It's always kind of relevant. Okay, so if I pull the texture up, it will make that part of the picture appear sharper. Texture targets smaller details and makes them sharper or softer. And texture is a good tool that people use to like make eyes seem sharper or kind of reduce some skin texture is a really common use of it. Clarity is a more blunter tool that targets kind of the image in general. For most purposes, I recommend texture, but explore. All right, let's see the last two, and then I think we should see how to take a picture and then move on to the next app. So the radial filter, you drag, and the red again describes which part of your picture is being affected. So let's do color, 0% saturation. We can see it's in black and white and it fades to color. You can also invert by hitting this rectangle with a circle in it above the garbage can. And now it's fading from color to black and white. So you can use these more than one way. This is a nice tool to bring attention to a part of a picture by making the surrounding areas a little bit darker or making that part a little bit brighter. If you don't like a selective edit that you did, you can always delete it too. So I'll show you that when we do the gradient filter as well. So let's add one more. And let's just do a left to right. And what we're going to do is have the picture go from cool to normal. And it's kind of hard to see what's happening. So let's go back to my radial filter and let's go ahead and delete it. So you can see a diamond is a brush adjustment. And if you kind of tap it a couple times, it'll show you what part it's adjusting. So diamonds are your brush. Circles are the radial filter, which makes sense. And squares are the gradient filter. So let's get rid of the radial filter. I'll tap it and then I'll hit the garbage can on the left side. Boink. Okay, so now you can kind of see what that gradient is doing. It's going from blue to neutral. And if I wanted to make it go from, oops, give it back, there we go. If I want to really exaggerate the effect, I can make it go from blue to orange by adding an orange gradient filter. And these are kind of exaggerated adjustments, but this is all done on my iPad or on my iPhone or your device. I don't want to be, this works on Androids too, without ever going on the computer. And it's non-destructive. So 2 more things to show you, the camera and exporting, and then we're going to move on. All right, so in the bottom right, and moment for questions if anybody has any, but I'm going to kind of go. The bottom right, we have the camera tool. And this opens up you can see my very dirty keyboard. Apologies. Here's everybody. This opens up a camera that shoots in RAW. If you look in the top middle, it says DNG. That's the Adobe Digital Negative. And you can change it to JPEG, but you're kind of getting rid of the advantage there. So you can switch it to Pro mode or you can leave it on automatic. I like feeling like a pro, so I put it on Pro. If you have a phone with more than one lens, you'll see the option to switch from wider view to telephoto, a closer view. You can actually change your exposure, or you can just try taking a picture. And the one thing I want to emphasize, this isn't exactly a photography workshop, but the best way to get good pictures isn't to know how to edit them nicely. It's to know a little bit about light. So if I take one here, and then I take one by some real light, I walked over to my window there. I just want you to see that, oh, well, let's go ahead and close the camera. The image quality, I guess I'm a little shaky. The window light is much stronger and higher quality. So just going to real light is already going to give me a huge advantage in my image quality. And then you take a good picture and make it better. So that's our goal, right? We don't want to make bad pictures okay. We want to make good pictures great. So then I can do all the same editing as before. And let's just go ahead and export this image out. Okay, here we go. The universal sign for save, share, export is a rectangle with an arrow pointing up. I'm sending it out. The opposite is to download, an arrow pointing down. So I'll tap that export, and you'll see several export options. We're just going to export to camera roll. So here we go. Boom. And it renders it and saves it. And it is now saved to my photo album on my iPad. We're going to go ahead and swap over to the next application, unless there are any questions about Lightroom Mobile. Okay, I'm back. No trouble here. Let me share my iPad again. Okay, good, good, good. Okay, so we saw Lightroom, and Lightroom is a really wonderful way to edit your images with a ton of control, right? It's got global edits that adjust the whole image, and it's got local edits that let you focus in and add as many as you like. But you can't really combine images, cut images out, add text, or any of that kind of stuff. So that's where Photoshop Mix comes in, which again is a free app. And one of the reasons you know it's free is because when you open it, you get advertisements in it. But if you want to join me in Photoshop Mix, we're going to be playing with this image of the desert. So let me show you what the splash screen looks like. There's my beautiful composite I made earlier of some dogs. But to start a new project in Mix, you hit the plus. You can take a picture. I don't think you can take raw pictures, but you can take a picture, or you can start from an existing image, which is what I'm going to do. Or you can also start from a blank canvas. Let's grab an image, and I'm going to grab this picture of the desert. It should be a familiar scene for about half of us here. Got some saguaros, very huggable. And when I use Mix is to play with multiple images. You'll see there's an adjust menu in the bottom left where you'll see a lot of familiar adjustments. So if there's something you didn't notice that you want to edit now, you can always do it after the fact. These apps, I'm fairly certain they work online. I use Lightroom everywhere and anywhere all of the time. I'm not sure, maybe Brian can clarify, like does the cutout tool in Mix actually talk to Adobe proper, or does it just do it itself?
I think it's built in. Most of these apps will work offline. You will need to get online at some point to reestablish that you have access to your subscription if you're using subscription pieces. But yeah, I do believe they'll work offline.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian.
And then syncing to Lightroom would require an internet connection for that sync to happen between your different devices. Yeah,
and just as a quick aside, the Lightroom CC app, like Brian mentioned in the chat, syncs perfectly with the Lightroom mobile app. You'll see the same images, edits, and everything, which is pretty cool. That means you can edit pictures from your desktop on your phone and vice versa. Okay, so if I wanted to make adjustments to this image, I could. It's got the auto fix, which actually is a little more aggressive than the Lightroom one. It tends to make an image with a lot of pop. Any changes you make here, you have to hit the check mark. Otherwise, you hit the X and it doesn't change it. But let's talk about what is appealing to me, and that's the layers. So number one, if you tap on an image, it'll get a blue shape around it. That means you have selected that layer. If you tap on the gray, you're now looking at your whole canvas, and you can pinch to zoom in and out. If you're selected an image and you start zooming in and out, you're actually resizing. So look for that blue outline so that you know what's about to happen. If nothing is outlined, you're going to zoom in and see what's happening. It's a pretty nice picture. Okay, let's add. So it gets a little bit hot. It's been a little cooler than usual this May. But let's put a water cooler in there. So perfect. That looks pretty great. Just, we want people to stay hydrated. We don't want heat stroke. So this water cooler, I need to cut it out because the background is there. And that's where the cutout function comes in. And unfortunately, oh yeah, there you go. Okay, in the top right, you'll see these diamonds on top of each other. That's how you can toggle whether or not you see the layers underneath. For me, I like to see the layers underneath once I'm finishing the selection. So let's go ahead and see what auto does. And let's turn our back layer back on. Boing. It did a pretty okay job. If you look at the right-hand side, there's a little bit of the wall still. But for something that's free and fast, I wouldn't complain too much. But let's go ahead and clean it up a little bit by going to the Smart tool. This is kind of looks like the magic wand and the quick select tool. Not really sure what happened there, but I'm going to pinch in and zoom. You can see some parts went transparent. So I'm going to go to add and bring that back in. Pretty good. There's actually a really clear line. So, and I'm just using 2 fingers to move the image and then 1 finger to affect the selection. And now you can see it got a little bit too much. So I'm going to zoom in, switch to minus, and try and pull that back. Not too shabby. And I'm still on minus mode. Let's see if I can bring this back in. I don't want to see the wall. And I'm going to demonstrate this a little bit faster than if I was working and trying to do a perfect job, excuse me. All right, I'm going to go back to add and get this transparent part added in, and back to minus and remove parts of the image that I don't actually want. Okay, doesn't look too bad. It's floating on top because there's bushes and whatnot, but that's okay. So now you hit check if you're done. Just to chat about the other functions, basic is a brush that keeps what you paint in plus mode and cuts out what you paint in minus mode. It's just how you brush is how you select, which some of you, maybe you use a pencil, like an Apple pencil or anything like that. That might be what you like to do because it's exactly whatever you can draw. The lasso, instead of just what you paint, it's what you loop, what you lasso, what you rope in, right? So if I draw a shape, whatever is inside that has been added. If it's in subtract mode, whatever is inside that has been subtracted. Intersect. What does intersect do when you only have one thing? So intersect, what you'll see is it will not reselect what has already been removed, and it will just keep only what intersects. So in this case, that part of the water jug intersects, so we keep that. And looking at this, I realized, oh no, pretty good. And shape lets you make a shape. You can choose from these 4 shapes. You can make a selection in a rectangle. This could be fun for. Okay, cool. And Tessa's going to be back. That's great. This can be good for making like collages and making something that has a little more 2-dimensional feel. The circle, this is for really selecting things with hard edges. So my water cooler's there. Let's go ahead and hit the OK. And it's its own layer that I can move around. I can resize. I can kind of plop in here and rotate if I want. What I want you to notice on the right-hand side now, I have 2 layers, the image and this mix layer. And you can actually make changes to the layers too, and you can copy them too. Let's say I want water coolers everywhere. I can tap on that layer again, and I can duplicate. Now I have 2. I can duplicate again. And now I have 3. This is great. I'm never going to be thirsty in the desert. You can also tap, and there's a few options. Snap will fit it to your canvas, which isn't what I wanted. Let's go back. Rotate will do a 90-degree rotation. And then there's the flip options where it actually gives you a mirror image, left to right, which is horizontal, or top to bottom, which is vertical. And you can even copy it to your clipboard and paste it into other applications. And there's also blend modes and opacity, but I want to show a different add-on for that. So let's go ahead and delete these extra ones. I think I got a little overzealous and made a mess. All right, let's add something else. Plus image, and let's add some soft serve. And again, just to demonstrate the selecting process, you go to cutout. I like to start with auto, switch to my smart tool, and put it in add mode to make sure I've got what I need. And then I just zoom in and clean up using subtract or add, depending on what I need to do. And there we go. I lost a finger here. I guess it's kind of strange to have a giant hand holding an ice cream cone, but nothing stranger. All right. And again, the slower, more zoomed in you get, the better selection you can make. If you have a nice clean background, a lot of that auto selecting works pretty well, but it still takes a little bit of work. Let's go ahead and hit check mark. And I've got ice cream now. But maybe what I actually want is to make this saguaro turning into an ice cream cone. And I think we can make that happen. So I plopped it on there. I made it the same size. Let's go back to cutout and let's zoom in a little bit. And now I'm going to use my basic mode, 0% hardness with a fairly big brush, maybe not that big, maybe bigger. And I'll just put it in eraser, and I can go and take the hand off and have this kind of saguaro that becomes not very believable, but that's okay. That becomes an ice cream cone. Everybody's heat stroke fantasy. There, perfect. Okay, now the last thing I want to show you. Okay, no big deal. It might just be me. Sorry, guys. I'm less interesting, but I'll take you through all the apps. No big deal. I'm going to show you how you can put a texture on top of everything, how you can add text if you like, and also how you can do what's called harmonize an image. I'm making something super weird here, but if you were doing something a little more purposeful, harmonizing is a good idea too. So we'll start with harmonize. If you tap on a layer and drag it inside the layer underneath and then let go, you have a few options. Merging just turns them into one layer. It combines their pixels. Copy the mask means it will apply the cutout from the cooler to the image underneath, which can be pretty useful. And harmonize means it's going to merge them and match their colors. So let's harmonize the water cooler to the background. And this would be something that you don't want to do unless you're totally done making cutouts and size adjustments and everything. So you can see before and after, the water cooler has that color to it now. If you're not sure that you're totally done, you can tap on a layer, duplicate, and just tap it again and hide it by hitting that eye in the top right. I'm going to stop for a moment. Are there any questions about Photoshop Mix so far? That's okay if you have them later. Okay, great. So let's harmonize this ice cream cone as well. It's actually soft serve. I will tap and hold, bring it down to the image and harmonize. Not bad, not too bad. And then let's put stars on top of all of this, and let's see what happens. Let's add a layer, image, and let's add space. And sometimes if you add an image that's bigger than the space you're working with, it asks if you want to make the canvas bigger. Generally, the answer is no, because you'll end up with empty space around your image. So let's cancel. I'm going to tap with 2 fingers and rotate. I'm going to tap in the gray and zoom out so I can see what I'm doing. And then tap on space again. And by default, mix constraints proportions, which is really nice because I don't like messed up pixels. Okay, now what I wanted to show you were some more functions here. If you tap on the image layer, you can change the opacity, which makes it transparent or opaque. Opaque you can't see through. So there it is at about 50% opacity. We see the stars on top, which is pretty nice, but I like blend modes more, which you can access here. You can also access in the bottom menu. So if I tap blend and I try different ones out, you'll see it blends with the images underneath in different ways. I think for this particular image, I like soft light because I've got soft serves there. It makes perfect sense. So if I hit OK, I have created this fairly bizarre, we'll call it surreal scene. All right, good. We're gonna try, I'm gonna wrap this one up. So let's add text and then let's party with tests. So I'm gonna hit plus again. I'm gonna say text and I'm gonna say ice cream. Woo. Oh, apparently I don't know how to type on an iPad. All right, I can move this, I can resize it. If I hit text format at the bottom, I can choose different fonts. I can lose a lot of time trying to choose a font, so I won't do that to you all. You can change the font color. You can add a fill behind it. You can slide the size here too if you prefer, and you can do a bunch of stuff, which Lightroom doesn't do. You can't do layers, you can't do blend modes, you can't do text. You can't cut things out. So Photoshop Mix is super fun to play with. Can you upload your own fonts? That's a really good question. And I don't know if Mix talks to your Adobe font collection or not. Brian?
I don't believe it does.
And I think that's because it's free. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But what's cool is I can send this to Photoshop on my computer, and then I can change that to one of my own fonts. So the final step in Mix is sending your project out. So that button, the arrow pointing up, you'll see you can save it to your camera roll just like before. You can put it in your portfolio, in your Creative Cloud library, a bunch of things. You can send it into Lightroom, and you can open it in Photoshop. And it'll actually open up on your desktop if they are talking to one another. So it kind of feels like magic, and I like magic. But I'll just save it to my camera roll. So it's saving. There it goes. Okay. And if I go back, if I back out, you will see my project collection. You'll get a little ad, no big deal. You'll see what I made today. It doesn't have a name. You can tap and rename it if you like. You can see the things I made yesterday. Some puppies, very nice. And if I look at my camera roll, you'll see my baby, and you'll see the 2 things I edited. This ice cream dream. So my share is paused. Hopefully you can see this. So there it is in my camera roll, the 2 images that I kind of demoed. Okay, great. All right. So I just went to my camera roll to show you that they exist here. All you missed was a picture of my baby. So sorry about that. All right, I'm going to stop and let's see if we can party with Tess now. I'm feeling good about it.
Can we see iPad or is oh All right. Thank goodness. Okay. So we are going to be doing Adobe Capture. So Adobe Capture is going to be a really fun tool to use to take your images and do something else with them. That's the best way that I can describe it, but we're going to blast through these pretty quickly. I know, we had a little bit of technical difficulties, but I'm going to go ahead and open up Adobe Capture. And when you open it up, you notice you land on an asset library. So you can see there are things that I've already done in here. And that's kind of just where it's pulling from. But if you notice, just like at the other apps you've seen before, at the bottom, there's a little blue icon that has a plus and a little camera. Adobe's pretty good at having universal signs for what you need to do. I'm going to show you really quickly what happens when you tap the camera first. And you'll notice, whoops, I'm already on a spoiler. You'll notice that it will give you the camera, but depending on this left hand or this right hand menu over here, you'll notice that there's a lot of different things that I can filter through to get different options. And we're going to go through 3 of these today. If you notice on your the reference guide, you'll see a whole list of everything you can refer to, but for sake of time, I'm going to start with shapes. So what shapes does is kind of what you can say turns an image into a drawing. And if you notice right over here, so I have this very, very interesting pair of scissors that I could take a picture of, and I can use this little slider on the side to refine the edges a little bit until I come up with a shape that I like. You can tap the screen to freeze, and you can even refine based off of what you have taken and just play around with it a little bit. And depending on if you like it, you can go ahead, and if you notice that there's this little circle with a check mark in the middle, you're going to go ahead and tap that, and you've got an image. So you might be asking, why on earth would I do this? This sounds interesting, but why? This can be really helpful for creating logos. So if, for example, you had something that you sketched out on a piece of paper and you wanted to take a picture of that, you could easily turn it into a vector, which is what the name of this is, and be able to use this to create a logo. Yes, Janet, these scissors belong on the book cover of a new thriller, but that's kind of the point. You could create art based off of your images, based off of pictures. So in this menu over here, you'll notice at the bottom, you have a little eraser tool, a little paintbrush. This eraser tool obviously erases, so you can take away some of these, unnecessary lines that you might not want to see on your pretty image. And of course, when you have more time dedicated to this, you can go really in depth into this, but for the sake of this, we're going to say this looks great. We're going to tap up at the top and say done. The next option over, you can crop it. So if you really just want to have, just these beautiful scissors, you can kind of move that around and you can hit save. So when we're ready to save it, you notice that it'll give you this screen. You can rename it the shape name. So if I wanted to name this scissors, did I spell that right? Underneath it, it's going to have a little file type, which is an SVG. This means scalable vector graphics. That's a very fancy term for the type of file that is going to be. If you are somebody who is Illustrator proficient, this is a great tool to be able to create vector images that you can later use in Illustrator. But it's a very flexible files type for those sorts of things. Now, if you notice underneath it, it's going to say save to. And right here, it's going to say my libraries. So Adobe assets get saved to this universal library that is attached to your Adobe account. So this means if I were to open up Illustrator and I wanted to pull up my asset library, if I have saved this image to that asset library, I'll be able to pull it up and using it later. On the iPad. Yes. So that's one way to use it. And if I click save, it'll go to my asset library. Apparently my iPad's very slow this morning. Technology. All right, there you go. So we're back in the asset library. So like we noticed before, where there is the camera icon, the other option is that we can import an image. So if you tap the plus icon, you can import an image that you have from your camera roll or that already exists. So you notice that there's something that says Lightroom. So tying back to what Alex was talking about earlier, you can also pull from your Lightroom edits as well. So for here, we're going to just choose this option, and you can just import whatever image you want to do. If I were to change something into an image, I might take this little puppy that you saw earlier. And now we have a little puppy guy. Look at how cute. So maybe you have a dog that you want to turn into a logo, and that's something you can do. So that's going to be the shape tool. The next one over is going to be my favorite one, and what you probably noticed in my asset library is the most use, which is colors. So what colors is going to do is create a color palette based off of the image that you have selected. So of course you can use the camera to take a picture. I don't have a lot of very pretty colors on my desk right now, so I'm going to use some of the assets that you have. But of course, if you go to your camera roll and choose something, if you have, this is just a picture I have on my camera roll, it goes ahead and uses its smart AI to come up with a really pretty color palette. And you might like it, you might not like it. If I were you, and I didn't like it, I would take my finger and I would drag these little dots to a place that I liked better. So maybe this shade of green isn't my favorite shade of green. I want something lighter. I'm going to go to a picture or part of the picture that's a little bit lighter, and I'm going to land it there. And you can go ahead and create a beautiful color palette. If you are someone who likes interior design, I've used this a couple times to take a picture from the internet that I really like the color palette for. And then I've saved this color palette, and I was able to use it to shop for similar colors. Like Alex mentioned, it's for developing themes for projects, brand consistency. So if you work for a university and you need to have a strict color palette for, all of the assets that you're going to be creating, that's something that you can use this tool for. It's super helpful, super pretty, and it's very useful. And of course, when you're done, you can go ahead and change it here. If you don't really like it the way that it is, you can tap on each individual square, and you can move the sliders to be able to change the hues, to make it whatever you want, and say this is good, you really like this, you'd click save. And again, it's the same exact save menu, is that you can save it to your library. And that way that you can pull it up. If you pop over into another tool that Adobe has, go ahead and use that. So I'm going to go back, and the next section over is looks. So looks is going to do something that looks similar, right? It's pulling a bunch of colors from this image. And it's going to be able to pull up a little bit of a color palette. What this does instead, and this is something that you might be more familiar with if you've used presets or anything like that, but it's going to go ahead and take those colors and create a photo filter based off of the colors that it has selected from that image. And this is a sample image, by the way. I don't know these people that comes with the app, and it allows you to scroll over to the different types that it has automatically generated. And now you have a photo filter. So this is great for creating your own unique look based off of your own photo colors and everything. And again, if you click save, you'll notice it'll save it to your library once again as a LUT, which stands for lookup table. This is super helpful for Photoshop and Adobe Premiere Pro, where you can take these looks that you've created and apply them to future projects as well. So that's the other thing that's really helpful. And the last thing I'm going to show on this one is probably the most fun, and I remember Brian and I used to play around with this a lot, is the patterns feature. So patterns you can do from this image, but I find it's best to do it from the camera because it's really fun to play around with it. But if you notice, it'll take an image and create a really cool pattern based off of what your image is or what your camera is selecting. And this is really fun to do to create backgrounds. So if you're somebody that needs, an iPhone background, or sorry, a phone background, or anything. Yeah, exactly. It's like a kaleidoscope, but it takes off the colors and shapes and textures based off of your images and or your camera, whatever you're taking a picture of. And I personally just find this incredibly fun to play around with. So, you know, yes, Janet, kids will love it. Brian and I also spend maybe a little bit too much time playing with it just for the sake of it. So that is great. So again, save it, and you will save it as a PNG once again to your library. You can pull it up and work with it that way. So I know that was a very quick blast through Capture. Any questions? I'm happy to answer, but this is, I would say this is a great thing to take your images and do something else with them that maybe can help you for future projects. That would be my best simple explanation for how to use Capture. Okay, I'm going to do the academic pause. Any questions? All right. Well, if there's no questions, we're going to blast right on through to Adobe or Photoshop Camera, which looks like this. So Photoshop Camera is very, very simple to use. So I know the last one might seem like a little bit, you know, wonky, but this one is very easy to use. It obviously gives you a camera that you could take a picture of, sure, very simple. But if you notice right here in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see all of these this little star icon. So if you tap that, it's going to give you what is called lenses. And this is going to look very similar to what you're probably familiar with maybe Instagram as filters. But you can go ahead and select different types of filters that are super creative and very fun to play with. Artful, I think, was one we were playing with yesterday, and make it look like a still life photo. If you swipe, so you notice the dots at the bottom usually is the indicator that you can swipe. So if you go ahead and swipe, it'll give you different options for that same filter, just based off of maybe different colors, different shapes, anything like that. So that's one cool way to do it with a camera for this workshop, again, because not the most interesting things on my desk. I'm going to go through, and we have the assets that we've pulled up earlier. You can use these to play around with. I found one earlier from one of my personal pictures that I thought was really fun for demonstration. So I selected a picture. If you notice this little magic wand icon right up here at the top, that means enhance. It's going to just naturally enhance your photos, bring out the colors and vibrance a little bit more. And you can tap the lenses and apply the lenses to this already existing photo. So you could do something like this, create like pop art, you know, based off of this photo. You can do spectrum. This is something cool too. You know, this is like your album art, right? Something very creative. Also, I can imagine this would be really fun to play with kids with. This one, blue skies, replaces the sky. So maybe if you had, like, this day was in San Francisco and super foggy, maybe you wanted blue skies, you can go ahead and swipe through the different types of blue skies, and it will apply that to yours as well, which is super fun. I'm going to do one that Alex and I played with yesterday, which is, you know, let's see, I'm going to take a picture that I already have. Let's save this one. I took this one in New York. And we played with this Godzilla versus King Kong one, which was extremely fun. I mean, look how much elevated that is just based off of that. I wanted to use this example to show you that some of these assets are movable. So if you take your fingers and pinch, you can move, you know, King Kong around. You can flip them upside down. You can move them to do whatever, you know, you want here. You can move Godzilla a little bit. Let's see, have him. Well, he's got to be on the ground, right? King Kong in that movie did a lot of jumping, so it's probably more accurate to do this. But you can see right over here that these assets are movable. And you can play around with them. Yes, I hope they can be your friends and solve their differences. They ultimately do. But so that's this option right over here. And again, you have your enhance option up at the top. You have the crop, which is the same as most of the other tools that we've shown. You can go ahead and crop it just based off of what you need. It'll remove for the cropping just so you can actually see what the photo shows. You can click done. And again, it also has these basic editing sliders that are very common in almost all of the Adobe products. You'll notice that, you know, shadow, highlight, clarity, vibrance, those are some of the things you saw earlier in Lightroom. But this one, obviously, they just bring it over for some basic editing. So if you really wanted to, bring out the highlights on this photo, feel free to, but I think it's perfect. I love it. I think it's great. And you can go ahead and save it to your camera roll once you are done with it. And again, choosing the size that you want. It even gives you preset sizes. So if you wanted to share this to Instagram, it has the one for Instagram as well. You can save that to your camera roll. So that's super fun. One thing that you can do with it, I would say Photoshop Lenses is all about having fun and doing creative things. Lightroom is going to be your heavy touch. You have this really great photo that you need to be cleaned up and edited. Photoshop Camera, I would say, have a little bit more fun with it. If you've got kids and they want to play around with this, I imagine they would have an absolute blast with this. Take it on vacation and make them go crazy. So any questions on this one? Hey, Lightroom, but Lightroom is fun. Lightroom's always my favorite too, but it's a different kind of fun. All right, there's no questions. I'm going to continue on to our last one, which is Photoshop Fix. This is what the icon looks like. So Photoshop Fix, another ad. X out of that. And go back out of here, is going to have you, move it this way, is a great tool for retouching and editing on your mobile device. And that can mean a whole lot of different things. And I'll show you a bunch of different examples of what retouching could look like. But the photo asset that you can follow along with is this guy over here that you probably saw earlier. It's this very studio photo of this guy. And I'm going to go through all of the little icons at the bottom, but we're going to really focus on what we highlighted in that Spark page, which is the healing brush tool, the smooth feature, and the liquify tool. So this one is going to be, I would say, probably a very interesting feature, because this is really going to see the power of what Adobe can do. So we have this lovely picture of this gentleman right over here. And we have all of these icons at the bottom. So the very first thing that you might notice is that maybe he's got a couple of blemishes. Maybe if this was something that you were working on as a selfie of you wanted, and you had a pimple and you wanted to remove it, this is something that you can use that is very powerful to get rid of them very quickly. So at the bottom tool panel, you'll scroll over to the little Band-Aid looking guy and tap healing. And similar to when you saw earlier with the brush sizes, it's very similar. If you move up, your brush gets bigger. If you move down, your brush gets smaller. The hardness, again, very similar to what Alex mentioned, whoops, is going to be the softness of the brush. And like he mentioned, always try when you're doing edits like this to use the softest brush. Like he said, it would look very weird if you had a hard brush line, you started painting all over this guy's face. It's going to look like you cut something out. So we're going to zoom in with using our 2 fingers to this guy's face. We have our spot heal at the bottom selected because we're healing some spots. And we're going to just tap on the spots that we want removed. And it's going to go ahead and remove it for us. Use your 2 fingers to move, tap, tap, tap. And you've got these spots instantly removed. And if you zoom out, you can see that they are gone. If you wanted to see a before and after, right up at the top left-hand corner, you'll notice this little icon that looks like a picture with a little split in the middle. And if you tap that, you can hold it, you can see a before. And if you let it go, it does an after. So before and after, you can see that there's that tool. So once you're done, you think that looks really good, you can go ahead and tap the check mark at the lower left-hand or right-hand corner. Whoops. All right, now he's good. So that's a really easy way to get rid of, I would say, blemishes. The next tool is going to be probably what I'm going to say is the freaky stuff, which is the liquify tool. So liquify will go ahead and the idea is that it almost turns your image liquid, so you can move it and manipulate it in different ways. In this specific app, you'll notice at the bottom, it automatically selects this face icon in the lower left, lower right-hand corner. This is basically Adobe knowing that this person has a face, attaching all of its magic to this face, and you can adjust based off of this. So if you tap on each of these little dots that it has come up, you'll notice it gives you a bunch of different options. So this one says jawline, and it will give you a slider. You can move the jawline and completely change the shape of this guy's face. Yes, disclaimer, this guy is perfect the way he is, and so are you. But this is an interesting tool to use. And we wanted to show you what the features could do. I'm actually going to show what I actually use the Liquify tool for, because I don't use it for people's faces, so that you'll have other options and other ideas of, what else could I do with this besides change this person's face entirely? But you kind of get the idea. If you tap on different areas of this person's face, you can change the shape of everything. And it's very freaky, but it is a very powerful tool. And so this is something that you are more than welcome to play around with to your, to your heart's content or not. So I'm actually going to say this gentleman is beautiful and fine the way he is. He's good here. The next option over, again, very similar, is the smoothing tool. This is very common to use for skin smoothing. It's the very same concept. You have your brush up, down in sizes and hardness. And if you brush over, it will build. So the first pass will be kind of smooth, but the more that you build on top of it, the more smoothing you're going to get. You can also do the opposite with sharpening. So, again, feel free to do what you will with this, but you can also do the opposite with sharpening and sharpen and make things more in focus. This, I think we mentioned earlier that this is really good for eyes. If you wanted to sharpen up the eyes a little bit, it's also good if maybe you missed focus on something, you can brush over it with your finger and sharpen it up a little bit. This is an insanely sharp photo, so you probably won't notice much on here, but that is one option that you can do as well. So let's get out of this guy's face because, it's great. We already mentioned that it's perfect the way it is. And I'm going to go more realistic use case for two of these tools. So here's a lovely family picture of me at the beach with my family. And you'll notice that somebody left their coffee cup right here, and it's driving me crazy. So what I'm going to do is use the same tool that we saw earlier, the healing brush tool, to take out that coffee cup because I don't want to see it. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to make sure my brush is around the size of the coffee cup. It's about that. Make sure my hardness, yep, that's pretty good. And I'm just going to brush over this coffee cup, maybe the shadow too, and boom, it's gone. So now we have a cleaner photo. There's no coffee cup. And check, and it's good.
Hey, Tess,
So
can I interject
Yes.
one little thing? When I was I think in Mix or in Lightroom, it was called feather. So you noticed I said I wanted to bring my feather up, but in here it's called hardness, and she brought her
Yes.
hardness down. So in case that was confusing for anyone, just
Yes.
that's a funny inconsistency, I guess.
I know they're normally pretty good at being consistent across platforms, but
Agreed.
Okay. And another ad. Yeah, that's how you can tell it's free. I'm not sure if Alex mentioned that earlier, but you'll get ads. So that's one way you can do it. Another way you can use the Liquify tool that maybe isn't as freaky as before. So here's a picture of my boyfriend, and his beanie is looking a little askew. If I go into the Liquify and I make sure that warp right here is selected, I can go ahead and move his beanie and make it a little bit rounder. Because again, you're liquefying the actual photo and you're basically telling it, make this like jelly so I can move it around as I want. And it's actually very fun to play with sometimes. So now we can do before and after. That's his hat. Now it's done. And now it looks like, it's a lot more shapely. It's a little bit prettier. This is great if you have hair that has gone awry, that's maybe blowing over to one side of the face and you need to move it out, or you maybe want to make your hair more voluptuous. That's one way you can do it as well. You have a hat that's askew. Those are ways that I've used the Liquify tool that's a lot less invasive. So I'm gonna click yes. And then we have our lovely photo. So I want to be conscious of time because I noticed that we only have a few minutes left in this workshop, and we wanted to leave room for questions. But was there anything specific that maybe you saw in the tool column you wanted me to use, or any questions that you had because otherwise I'm going to throw it back to Alex. I know that was quite quick, but want to be conscious and respectful of everybody's time. Well, I'm going to show really quickly how to export. So I think Alex mentioned earlier, the universal sign for exporting is little square box with the arrow pointing up. So you're going to go ahead and click that. And you'll notice, again, you have the save to camera roll. You can send it to Photoshop if you want to continue working on this, or Lightroom. And for this case, you know, because maybe I just want to have this cute little photo for myself, I'm going to say save to camera roll. And it's going to go ahead and say complete. I like the image of, oh yes, I did. I took that the other weekend because I bought some new studio lights and I was playing around with it. So that was my test of random objects that was on my table with my studio lights. Something you could do in here, so the color option, you can paint on different colors, and you can, oops, let me change colors. You can paint onto this. So if I wanted this to be a different color, I could do that as well. You can also lighten and brighten different areas of your photo. So for example, if it was too bright here, I could create a brush that lightens it up, and you'll notice it looks a little weird, but you can go ahead and see that I'm lightening up this area as well. So those are additional tools that you can use. Goodness. I love the color palette. Yeah, I should do an Adobe color palette with Adobe Capture.
I like that goldenrod. So thank you so much, Tessa. You're amazing. I appreciate it. It's a nice change of rhythm, right? We've got time for questions. Just because it says we're until noon, you don't have to run away if you want to know more. I want to put in the chat our summer workshop page, because this is also where you can find all of the recorded workshops. So if you go and revisit, for example, photography workflow with Lightroom and Photoshop, and you click it, it takes you to the YouTube channel. And in Show More, it's broken into chapters, and the reference page is there for you all as well. So with that being said, thank you so much for joining us. And if there are any questions, we will happily take them.